Hello, it's Monday the 19th today, and this is the Housing Law live stream. Sorry, a bit late starting, some little technical problems, had to restart the computer. So Shannon can't be with us today, but Karis and Mike are. And Mike, you wanted to raise a couple of things that we were just mentioning before, so shall we start with those?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I've been doing this kind of like database of LGSCO decisions. I've got a bit of an echo right now. I don't know who. Yeah, I'll keep talking anyway. So, but I came across one that's tucked away in last week's LGSCO weekly newsletter thing, and it's from Halton Council, Halton. I think it's up in Liverpool, that sort of way.
Yeah,
But
Halton, yeah.
basically, so it's really like it's really kind of like a little hidden gem because it's kind of doesn't seem that interesting on the face of it. But basically, what happened was the LGSCO like investigated a closed application, which was closed because of the unreasonable and deliberate refusal to cooperate and the kind of close the relief duty. And they realised there were some issues there, so they basically then went back and said, right, how many other clients was this affecting? And the Houghton Council said, well, there's 9 in the period you've asked for. And basically, what appears to have happened then, and I mean, the LGC I think makes a finding of it. They basically the council had made up documents, so they basically like they kind of forged. Yeah, I mean, I think forged is the right word. They kind of forged these documents they said they'd sent out, and then like so the LGSO said this is suspicious. We want your auditors to basically go through these files to work out if they're legit, and obviously some of them weren't. And then but it doesn't kind of it makes no finding about that. So I can only assume that there was some like disciplinary action taken by the council, but the LGCO didn't comment or say like, this is troubling or anything like that. Just kind of said it really matter of fact. So yeah, I'll probably talk more about it, but I just thought I saw that come up, and I just got a what if question. So let's say there was a family who had been through the mill. Let's put it like that. A lot of kind of difficult things they've been through. They're placed into interim accommodation, or I think it's interim at this stage. Interim accommodation by a council. I think the council's an illegal aid desert, if that makes any difference. And there's basically this property or this kind of like block of flats or whatever they're in is just kind of horrendous in terms of lots of police incidents. So basically, like at some point recently, there was an attempted murder. But there's like lots of other sort of things happening there, and so the family's saying we're too terrified to live here. This is ridiculous. Even on a good day, we've got all sorts of ASB problems going on, and so the council like reluctantly housed them in a hotel over the weekend, but now saying they must return. So I guess I guess it's potentially one which might end up kind of working its way towards Virgo solicitors, but I just wondered what your initial thoughts were about prospects of challenging that successfully based on the ASB, because the police are saying, in one sense, the police seem to be saying, well, the guy's been arrested now that tried to kill someone, so it's safe. So the official police line is it's safe to return there, but it's that kind of like the environment in general, just the family just seem too terrified to be there, basically. So yeah, as I say, I don't know if you've got any kind of similar cases you come up against. I want to go back to them and just kind of give them some pointers, really. It's like an advocate that's kind of they're advocating for this family. So yeah, what your thoughts are.
What did you think, Karis? Sorry.
Yeah, I would say, well, there's the effect on the house that's unsuitable for them. It could be on their mental health and the dangerous thing, because how do they say when they say, oh, he's gone, it's like it's not ongoing. It's the ongoing risk. It's how minimalised they think the risk is.
Yeah, as I say, it's not. It seems like the issues aren't just coming from one person who's now been arrested. It's coming from other people as well. So it just seems to be like an environment which is just like just dangerous, not somewhere you want to have kids, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if the other people pose a threat, then it's arguable it's not reasonable. Did you say this person's quite vulnerable?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's, by the sound of it, they're refugees. So my guess is they've already probably got some long-standing difficulties that led them to come here. So that's I'd say I don't have any more information than that at the moment, but I just thought, yeah, yeah, whether it's in the ballpark of being something which has got a chance of being successfully challenged by a solicitor, basically.
Definitely worth looking into. So send them along if you want to.
Yeah, I'll get back to him. That's cool. Thanks.
Before we go on, so I'm just getting a bit distracted because I was looking on my phone and I couldn't see that we were streaming, but we must be streaming because we're getting comments in. But
yeah, we are. Yeah.
Can you see it on YouTube? Oh, great. Okay. So, anybody else got anything to raise? No.
Is it worth
Well,
also
sorry,
saying,
that would
Will,
be
that
you, Gareth, because Mike's already raised these things. But I was
just real
wondering
quick,
Sorry,
I was just going to say, Will, do you want to say about the like the kind of this spreadsheet of LGSO decisions you put on your website now? So is it worth kind of sharing that yet, or yeah, is it?
well,
I mean, it seems to be ready
I
to
could
go.
do.
It
I
works.
haven't. I was. Yeah, I could talk about. I'll talk about the. If it's okay, I'll talk about the case law database, and then I can show. I was ready to talk about that one. I wasn't sure that you were happy with because it's your baby, that one, the LGO one. But I can find it and put it up there. But it's just that I've got the links. But there will be. Yeah, why don't I find it anyway? Won't take a minute. I'll just get this. Oh, there it is actually. So if I go to view site, and then is that? Oh, hang on, I've got to change this. So now it should be there. And let's see. You can change to that. Yeah, can you see? This is it, which anybody can access if you if you search for it, or I'll put a link to it on the show notes afterwards. So this is a day. Do you want to talk about it, Mike? Because you set it up.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's basically just me trawling back through all the weekly newsletters I've ever got, and I'm like about 6 months in so far. And so any case that looks interesting, I mean, bear in mind, I'm not reading them all like word for word, so I'm sure I'm probably missing a few. But so basically, there's the code on the left. So the code on the left, if you just input that into the LGO website, so if you lgo.org.uk, and then you go to the decisions tab, and then you put that code in, it'll pop up. One of the reasons I did this was that in the Jan Luber textbook, there's a reference to a case which has been taken down from the LGSO website now, but it's still useful. So I think there's a time limit. So I'm basically at the same time, I'm also saving all these documents as a backup because, as I say, they're still useful. But yeah, so you put it in there, and then basically I started off using AI to do the summary, which works. But then I just thought, well, why don't I actually use the existing summary? It's about the same length and does the same job. And then try to kind of come up with these keywords that will help you search. So things like you could search for gatekeeping, you could search for domestic abuse. There's like interesting ones, things like assistance dogs, the difference between an assistance dog and an emotional support dog. The sort of things that we kind of often have questions about mental capacity, homeless applications. There's kind of lots of stuff within that. So yeah, so I mean, basically, it's going to end up being a lot of cases, but I'm hoping the tags and stuff will just make it quite easy to navigate. This is how I learned about homelessness law, like whatever it was, like 12, 13 years ago. Just went on the LGO website, just read them all, and this is like, for me, it's kind of such a good way to see how not only what the law is, but also just to see councils getting done for it, because often you kind of get gaslit in this sort of thing, and you kind of council trying to convince you that it's not actually breaking the law after all. But the LGO is very clear about this is illegal, this is unlawful, whatever. So yeah, so I hope it's going to be a useful resource for people to just kind of have a look at, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this one's still a bit of a work in progress, and there's more things we could do, because we could add a column to it so that you've got the actual document that you can then download if people want to. Plus, you could put a link to we could have a link column as well to the actual report itself, which I guess brings me on to the other. I mean, sorry, I should just say I'm going to find this a lot more helpful, and maybe help me to work with ombudsman reports, because I find them quite, because of the coding system, and then I find it quite difficult to remember which is which and how to access them. But now, using this, we can say, well, if there was a case involving a support dog, or for instance, we can search against, if we go for keywords, that should work. Yeah, if we go to that one, and then, hang on. Yeah, if you go to the filter, so as I say,
there's a search one just to the right of that as well, which is what I was using. That works.
Yeah,
so the little right top right
should work. If we go to keywords, and then we go to filter, and then we go keywords. Yeah, so for instance, if you want to find, well, we happen to know that there's the £600 keyword there. So if we just search £600, it'll just find that case for you. So that's a really powerful thing. So that anything you stick in that, and then if you want to search by council, you think, what was that case involving London Borough Lambeth? You can just search against the name of the council, which would be that one. So you could change it to Oxford. I guess everyone knows how databases work, but there it is. But I find that really great, because although the local government ombudsman's got their own search thing, I don't find it that friendly. You've got to know what you're looking for, really, haven't you?
It also, quite often I'll be searching for exactly the right reference number and it won't come up. So there's just, I mean, if the LGSO is watching, they need to sort out their search function and also make it discoverable on Google. I don't see why they wouldn't, because when you Google, if you were to Google gatekeeping in Oxford City Council, this would not come up. Like it's not accessible to Google. So, and I don't see any reason why that would be necessary. I just think that they should make it, or this way, if you make it more accessible, but hopefully they'll do that there, and so you don't need it. Basically, you just be able to Google stuff and it'll come straight up.
Great. So what I've done, I'll move on from that if that's okay. I mean, I'm sure we'll come back to that another time. What we have here is the list of things I've put on. So if people want to come back and have a look at what we were talking about, they can. This is a link to my blog, and you just go wfleck.com and that'll bring it up. And also there's a link to the video, which will hopefully come from that one. So what I wanted to, I think maybe we'll come back to the beach case in a minute, if that's okay. So just what Mike was talking about, what I was talking about as well, with the local government ombudsman reports, we've done something similar with case law, and I've put a blog post about this if you want to read more on the same blog, so you can find it there. It's just here on the links as recent posts. So what this one does is goes through all, well, it's got about 500 cases in here at the moment. I put some more in today that I got from Capstick's monthly insights website page, which is really good. So they've put some more cases on there. So what you can do, the same thing, we've got what we were talking about as keywords before. I've just put as tags here, and they're a bit more colourful. So I've tried to think of anything that's relevant to the case that would help you remember it. So this should enable people to find law reports, and I'll show you again. I'm not going to go too much, click this and click that, but this is quite a useful thing. So if you wanted to know all the cases that we've got in here that involve suitability of accommodation, and they were decided in the Supreme Court, you do that, and there's the cases. So those are the major cases over the years since 1986. There may be cases that are missing. If anybody's looking at this and they spot gaps, then please do let me know. You can put a comment or email me. Either put a comment in this or on the video, on the YouTube or on the blog. That'd be great. But say you want to add Court of Appeal to that, make it a bit more. So then you've got all the Court of Appeal cases as well, and that would hopefully be useful for people wanting. If you hear people talking about a case, it may be that it's in here. And again, if you wanted to know, I mean, if you're doing some research, hopefully that'll be useful. So to go back to, there's an explanation of how this works in the blog post. But if I go back to the contents for today, there's some new videos up. Well, they're not actually that new, but they seem to have been posted recently. But if anybody's wanting to spend some more time on YouTube looking at things, or I find these very useful for using as a podcast rather than a video, because it's usually a sort of talking head with some slides but and they can go on for quite a while. So if I'm going for a walk or something, I can listen to key developments in homelessness. I was actually at that seminar, I think, in person, and that was in January, but it's not that old. So that's recent case law, and that's from Doughty Street Chambers. And actually, Mike, the one you went to, the Rogue Landlords video, is up. I didn't put it on here because the quality of it isn't that great, and I thought I might just look at it in a bit more detail. But it sounded interesting. Now, Doughty Street, as we all know, but people listening may not know, I would say I think there's the giveaway is they did have a corporate slogan, I think, which was at the forefront of human rights, which probably makes you realise they tend to act for applicants and tenants rather than local authorities, and they do a very good job. But over on the other side of the barricades, we've got Cornerstone barristers, who I don't think I'm doing them a disservice if I say in my experience, they very rarely act for applicants and tenants. And I think one may say, well, that's a bit of a shame because barristers ought to take on whatever case comes their way, and the cab rank principle, and we shouldn't all be getting sectarian. But unfortunately, I think I don't act for landlords, not because I think landlords are bad people, but I find there's a whole different mental set. It's like I don't particularly like driving on the other side of the road. And if I'm acting for a landlord or the other side, I tend to think I'm going to make some mistake because I'm good at stopping people I like to think I'm good at stopping people getting evicted, but I'm not. I may miss things and getting them evicted, which is one reason I don't do it. But these guys are very, very good. It's always a bit of a sort of worry if one of them turns up on a homelessness appeal or something, especially Catherine Rowlands, who I'll come back to in a moment. She's on a real, forgive the pun, she's on a real roll at the moment because she's winning like loads and loads of cases, and most of the ones I've been putting onto the database seem to involve her successfully defending homelessness appeals and judicial reviews and things. And she also puts very, very useful notes of the cases on the Cornerstone website. So here we've got I haven't watched this one yet, I'm looking forward to it, avoiding successful homelessness appeals. So as you can guess, that's not about that's successful from stopping us lot winning. But it'd be interesting to see what they say. And then there's another one here with this is from January. This is Garden Court, who are again back on our side of the fence. Discrimination and housing waiting lists. And this one I particularly want to watch, but I haven't done yet. It's been since last December, but it's a problem you get when people are in asylum accommodation. They get granted refugee status, and it's a bit like the old days when kids were in care. You'd get a birthday card from the council saying, "Happy 18th birthday, and by the way, we're evicting you tomorrow because you're no longer entitled to children accommodation." And then they'd have to go and try and get somebody at the council housing department to process the application. I think that has improved a bit over the years, but unfortunately, refugees get the same thing. They get told you're out of your Home Office accommodation, and they have to go to a council who aren't particularly welcoming. So this is a course on how to avoid that happening. So those are all videos that are coming up. And I had a comment I wanted to just read, see what, this is from Charlie Thomas. This is a comment from the blog, so I just pasted it on here. It says, "Thank you for sharing your experience. This is an old blog I did ages ago. I don't know if you find this, Mike, but you make a video in sort of January 2022, and then in May 2025, somebody puts a comment on there. But of course, it to them, if they've just found it, it seems like it was on there yesterday. But I put this comment a while ago about Central London County Court being at sort of almost breakdown levels of in unresponsiveness and delays in listing. And Charlie asks, he says it's concerning to hear about delays and lack of communication. Yeah, like no response to correspondence for weeks. Given the broader issues of court backlogs and resource constraints highlighted in recent reports, do you believe these systemic challenges are contributing to the difficulties you've faced? Additionally, have you considered submitting your experiences to the Justice Committee's ongoing inquiry into the work of the County Court? Your first-hand account could provide valuable insight. Well, my response is, yeah, I think I mean, the systemic challenges. I mean, I assume you mean just sort of cuts and so forth, and yeah, they are contributing. And I'm afraid I didn't even know about the Justice Committee's inquiry into County Court, so I haven't contributed to it. It's probably it's one of those things I just don't have time to do, but I'd like to. And I'm just thinking, before we go on to talk about the case of Beach, which may take up most of the rest of the session, I just wanted to plug the Housing Sector podcast, which is and blog, which is having a mental block. I emailed him this morning. What's the name of the guy, Mike? Who?
I want to say it is something Jenkins. Hold
Yeah,
on, I'll tell you.
sorry. Apologies for forgetting that, but it's probably down the bottom.
Ben Jenkins. Ben
Jenkins. Sorry, Ben. And this I wanted to mention is because it's such a good. This post here, struggling to hear, try listening, is one of the best things I've read in the sector for a long time, and Ben manages to hit the nail on the head sort of consistently throughout this article, which I'll summarize it, and I'd recommend anyone read it and listen to the podcast which goes with it, which is this one here, and the other ones. But Ben's talking about a phenomenon which I think we all experience and find worrying, which is he's looking at it from the housing association or the public sector housing area, where people who maybe work in the sector think I've got a great idea for making things better, and they may then go on and set up their own business or organization to do that. But the process, once you start doing it, the thing takes on a life of its own, and you start basically working for the sake of your organization rather than for the reasons that you set up the organization in the first place. And that ties in with the fact that these large housing associations have become, I mean, I think all of these, and I could go on listing a few more names that have escaped this list, but they've become what I call, I mean, I hate to use the term, but it's a Star Wars term, but it's like Death Star. That these big, huge, big things floating around the universe that used to be sort of so socially aware organizations that came from the sort of left and the sort of hippie sort of background, a lot of or do-gooders, but they've become. I mean, look at this here, Peabody Trust. I mean, they got into trouble for taking 200 days to leave tenants without answers to questions. And then London Quadrant managed to leave somebody without a bathroom repairs for 21 weeks. But the problem is, I think these that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, daily life for anybody who's dealing with these organisations is don't bother trying to call them on the phone, because you just get through to a caller centre. And when you get to the end of the call, you might speak. If you're lucky, you'll get through to somebody who's just looking at a computer. And they can say, "Oh yes, you live at this address, don't you?" And you say, "Yeah." And then they say, "Well, I can pass on a message if you like," and that's it. So there's very little response. But meanwhile, they have meetings and things. And how there was one the other day, wasn't there, that Ben was commenting on, where they'll talk about things, but it all becomes performative. I think there's some great turns the phrase in here that it just becomes a sham, really. And the problem is that the people that started off as do-gooders, they maybe have their little stalls in these meetings, and then they have to, by implication, keep in with all the people that are running it. So they can't sort of say, "Hey, this is a sham," because then they won't get invited back, and their business will fail. So this is a really good analysis of that problem. And I think we've all got to look into ourselves and see that happening, because, for instance, I think this applies to solicitors and barristers just as much as housing sector people, because if you notice, the barristers, I mean, the barristers' chambers I just mentioned in those videos, they all produce the videos and the talks as a corporate thing for the chambers. They're not really interested in working together around the problems. And so, you know, that old dilemma that if somebody found a cure for a common cold, the sort of pharmaceutical industry would probably try and quash it because that would be the end of their cold cures. And I often have a feeling that solicitors would be, if somebody waved a magic wand and Lambeth Council did all their repairs the next day after you reported them, there'd be a lot of tears, because that would be holidays that wouldn't be taken because of all the money that they wouldn't make from Lambeth. And I think it's easy to, you start off being a sort of, you know, thinking of justice and but you end up sort of a few years down the line just thinking of cost targets and promoting your firm against other ones. Do you find that, Mike? I mean, the classic in the housing advice thing is where um, you get embedded, as it were, or you're dealing with an organisation and you can't call them out or refer people to solicitors to sue them, because then some boss is going to talk to your boss and say, "Hey, that Mike Hayden, he's a loose cannon. Can you call him in, rein him in?"
Yeah, it's happening on a lot of different ways, I think. So, yeah, I mean, there's loads of charities won't challenge the council, like they won't challenge the council for that reason only, and you kind of have I mean, it is just sham stuff, isn't it? It reminds me when my time in the evangelical church, when you basically always have a promise of the next revival coming, and they kind of bring in the next set of big speakers, and they make huge amounts of money at these conferences. And it's kind of a bit like that with the housing sector, because there's several conferences a year that are big ones that you're supposed to go to, I guess, if you're in the know. And the only people that win, I guess, are people who are taking the tickets for the conferences, really, because it's the same stuff every time. That's what Ben's saying, that I've heard him kind of when he's on LinkedIn, kind of having a pop at people. He says exactly the same messages last year, but no one's kind of, everyone's kind of sort of saying this. Oh, yeah, it's really great to see everyone and this sort of stuff. So yeah, he wrote some really funny stuff actually. He wrote one on LinkedIn which was like, I wonder what the expenses claim forms going in right now are going to be like coming back from Brighton with all these, like, big wigs going down there for hotel accommodation and stuff, and saying, is that really value for money for our residents? So I think like what his tone and his kind of approach to this, like, I don't think anyone can really, you can't argue with him because he's right. And I think there's a lot of people out there in the sector who probably get quite big pay packets, quite scared of him, because he'll just say he'll say what's actually happening, very loudly, it seems. So yeah, I think he seems like a really good guy.
Yeah, I must just read this line because I thought it was particularly brilliant. So the sort of meetings you're talking about, or the conferences, he says these gatherings rarely confront uncomfortable truths, instead reinforcing the status quo with familiar faces, industry insiders, and token tenants. And I thought that's just perfect. I mean, so Ben, please keep doing what you're doing. It's so nice to see somebody writing something um, that's actually confronting reality, rather than the sort of humble blagging rubbish that you get so much on LinkedIn and the blogosphere about, sort of ever so proud that we've sort of won the award for the best housing association, and they don't really, whoever gave it didn't really evaluate it. So I'm hoping that we can get Ben as a guest on here one day. Or I could go. I mean, I was talking. He mentioned about me going on his podcast as a guest, but hopefully we'll work more closely together in future. So I think that brings us back to the case of Beach, which we were talking about last week, and I have actually gone away. I'm feeling quite pleased with myself because I actually did my homework, as it were, this week. Because every week I go away and think I'm going to read a law report and actually know what I'm talking about, rather than just. And this one I have gone through. It took me about some hours, and I wrote down my thoughts on it on this blog post. It's not so much my analysis of it. It's just trying to figure out what it actually means. Because the problem with law reports is they're dealing with the specific facts of that case, and at the same time they're dealing with universal issues, and sometimes you can lose track of the point. So did you want I mean, I don't know if anybody can read this. I mean, you'll be relieved, and I'm not going to try and read it all out. But should I try and summarise it, or do you want to take the mic, Mike, and ask a question or raise something about it? We can.
So, I mean, I'd be interested to see what, because I think I read it last week, and I think for me, like, it's quite a specific, quite a niche thing. There's kind of all these, again on like LinkedIn, there's all these kind of big, who I don't know where they come from, but sort of celebrating this is like a really big news, and it's a really kind of niche sort of situation you're going to get. But actually, there was a question I'm going to have, but maybe when you kind of explained it, the idea of normal residency, because the wording they're using, or whichever it is, the third judge that gives his judgment in it, basically, I think actually, I don't see why you wouldn't be able to apply his wording to the local connection test, particularly around rough sleeping, because he basically says, like, so these kids weren't living with the dad for, like, I don't know, a short period of time. It wasn't set in time as such. But the judge says no, at that point the kids were not normally resident with the dad. But in one sense that's quite a narrow reading of that word, those words, because you think, well, okay, they're not living there now,
Yeah.
but normally they would do. But you got the same idea with like if you're living in an area, there's a bit in the code of guidance about local connections if you're rough sleeping, and you still get a lot of pushback from council. So I just wonder if the same wording would effectively kind of strengthen that argument to say, yes, whatever whatever they've been living, wherever they've been living up to now, at the moment they're residing in this district. They don't have a connection anywhere else, so therefore they are going to be approaching this council. So yeah, I'll come back to that. Sorry, if we go on to
Well,
the
the question, I think the term. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you're talking about the one about might reasonably be expected to reside. Is that the one?
Yeah, but because the first, I don't know how you might be interested if you just explain to people how these work, because I never know how it works. You seem to have three judges in this case, and the first, I guess, like a leading judge or something, like the primary judge gives their assessment, and I thought the primary judge's one didn't make sense, but then there's like the next one says, yeah, I agree, then the third one says, I agree with the conclusion, but I have a different methodology for getting there. And that was actually first of all the one which I thought made the most sense. I was like, yeah, okay, that sounds reasonable, but also introduced this terminology of normal residence or normally resident. So he was talking about what is the
I'm not sure.
household.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how it works, because my thought generally, and I think this is how it generally works, is that one judge gives judgment on behalf of the court. I mean, if it's a High Court judge, they're probably sitting on their own, but in the Court of Appeal, I think it's three judges that would be sitting, and then let's just check, because there are a couple of Court of Appeal. In fact, this is a Court of Appeal case, isn't it? So we can go to the database and have a quick look at the transcript. So it's before 1, 2, 3, 4 judges. No, sorry, 3. Just one of them goes on to the second line.
And it's Justice Nugie, the one. So in paragraph 85, because you got paragraph. So you got paragraph 83 with the first one, does it? Or like before that, paragraph 84, Lord Justice Stuart Smith says, I agree. And then Lord Justice Nugent says, I also agree that the appeal should be dismissed, but I found this appeal to be very far from straightforward.
Yeah.
And I thought it appropriate to explain in my own words why the end has come up with the same conclusion.
Yeah.
But it's useful.
I wasn't sure why that was necessary, although I was quite glad that he did, because I found his view. I mean, his was a shorter session, and I found him easier to follow, and he did it in a really good. I mean, the way he walked us through the issues was very good. But I don't know what the convention is. Maybe if somebody else does, why it would be necessary for Nucci to give his account when he's basically agreeing.
I've seen it before, but you also get it with dissenting judges, don't you? Where like you get like, so I remember like with Hotak case where Lady Hale dissents from the judgment and says, I don't agree with this bit, and she kind of gives her 2 penneth worth.
Yes. So the long and the short of it on this one, though, is that they all thought that the appeal should be dismissed, and I worked my way through it. And shall I just explain? Because I went through the other cases. You sort of have to go back through the case law, and it goes back to 1996. But in fact, looking at it, from another perspective, you have to look at it in a, I mean, I hate it when people talk about this, but they say you've got to look at it in a real world, common sense sort of view, which usually just means somebody's prejudiced. But in this sense, the practical issue is that the council are faced with giving people accommodation often at very short notice. I'm not starting some, they have a very hard job to do, and but at the end of the day, the issue here was whether this guy who didn't have his children living with him at that time, whether it was appropriate to offer him accommodation where the children couldn't stay. And arguably answers, I mean, the practical answer is yes, because they didn't need to stay. And that it would be absurd to say that because he's assessed as having 3 children or 2 children living with him, or reasonably expected, that any accommodation has to be big enough for children who are staying somewhere else. Because in this case, sorry for people who haven't followed the facts, but at some point, the council had made a decision that he was in priority need because he was reasonably expected to have 2 children living with him, and a court had ordered that the children should reside with him, or he should have residence, or they should reside. I've forgotten how the terminology. But for some reason, that had broken down, and the kids were back with the mother temporarily. So the question was, where should they put him during that time, or for a short time while they looked into things? And things being giving him somewhere more suitable where the kids could live. And they offered him a hotel where the kids couldn't stay. And he stayed there for one night and then he left. And then they said, right, you've given up the place, so we're cancelling the booking. And the council then said you're intentionally homeless, which seems very harsh, doesn't it?
I mean, I think that in fairness to the council, they'd obviously been like, it was like there was a series of things. I mean, I get the sense that they were kind of just tired of him.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is another practical thing, and you have to think about it in the decision making. But I mean, I think they reported that he was said to have turned up at the accommodation intoxicated. So I assumed that they'd just run out of patience with him and said, right, we're going to do this. And the fact was, the court said yes, they lawfully can do this. It'll be, I mean, I'm not. You could speculate as to what happens when he gets the kids back and whether he can make a fresh homelessness application. Lots of things for lawyers to get their teeth in there. But if you go back through the case law, I'll just talk you through it. You can see how dangerous it is for people to refuse accommodation and risk intentional homelessness and discharge duty. So if I just talk through these cases, there was a wooer in '96, which we've talked about in passing. But the key point from that was that you could become homeless from temporary accommodation. Okay, because before that there was a sort of thing, well, it's not settled accommodation, it's just there for a bit, so it can't be reasonable to continue to occupy. And there they said no. Now, Birmingham and Ali and Moran were 10, no, a bit later, no, 10 years, 13 years later. And that, what they were saying in Birmingham and Ali was, Birmingham was making decisions to say to people, okay, you're homeless, but we're going to leave you where you are for now, because we haven't got anywhere and we'll find somewhere. And it's okay for you to stay there for now. They challenged it and said, no, it isn't. You found us homeless, so you've got to give us somewhere right now. And then the coupled case of that was Moran, where there was a woman who was found intentionally homeless because she left a women's refuge. And in the Birmingham part, they said, you can be homeless in the sense that your accommodation is not reasonable for you to continue to occupy in the long term. It's not suitable for you, but it is reasonable for you to continue to occupy just for a little while we find you somewhere. Which was a practical solution, I mean, but not ideal. And in Moran, they said a women's refuge can't be settled accommodation. And you can't be intentionally homeless from women's. She couldn't be intentionally homeless from that women's refuge, because they're so. The nature of a women's refuge is it can't really be a home because you can't give your address out, you can't have visitors. It's very, and you can be evicted at any minute. You have. I think she just had a row with a member of staff or an argument, and she got evicted. So they found in her favour there and said, no, you couldn't be intentionally homeless, which you may think, well, how come Mr. Beach got that? Because he was in a hotel and it was pretty restrictive, no guests, etc. But I think, Mike, you may have hit the nail on the head there when you were saying that they were a bit fed up with him, that if you present as a sort of sympathetic person that the judges maybe want to help, you're in a much better position. So if you're a sort of elderly widow of some Battle of Britain veteran, I mean, there's not so many left now, but the judges are going to be bending over backwards to find in your favour. Whereas if you're a Class A drug user who's on video stealing things from other residents in a refuge, in a hostel, you're not on a level footing, I don't think. And that's what happened in Kyle. There you had, I think it was Kyle, where the guy was on video stealing stuff from other residents, and it was held that his accommodation would have been reasonable if he'd behaved himself, and that they said in Kyle that a sort of rehab place couldn't be accommodation, and they said, well, it could in the short term. That's what it's all about here, is just giving people somewhere for the short term, which is why you should always accept something and challenge it, because nobody's saying you should stay there for a long time. And then you come up with, you then get to this case, where if he'd had the children with him, they could never have offered him this because it would have been unsuitable. Although I feel I'd take the words back, because a lot of people thought he shouldn't be intentionally homeless now because it was unsuitable. But the question, if he turned up at the office the next day with the children, I think he'd have been in a stronger position. But as it stood, it did make sense. We just go through the questions, I think. Yeah, sorry, I went through it here. These are the 5 questions, sorry. And I think this is in the second judgment. So in order for him to be intentionally homeless, you can just follow it through logically. Did he deliberately do or fail to do something? Well, yes, he did. He failed to occupy the hotel room. Okay. And the terms of the accommodation said, if you don't occupy, we'll cancel the booking. So there's no doubt he lost the accommodation. Did he cease to occupy the accommodation as a result? Well, yes, he did. So he deliberately didn't stay at the hotel. That's the first bit. As a result of that, he had to leave the hotel. Was the hotel room accommodation? Well, yeah, I mean, this goes back to the case of Pulhofer, where they said that basically anything is accommodation. It just has to be suitable and reasonable to continue to occupy. So if they put you in a pigsty with a little roof on it, and said, there you go, it's accommodation. You could say, well, yeah, it is accommodation, but it isn't reasonable to continue to occupy. So it's very difficult to say that something isn't accommodation. I'm trying to think of something. There are some cases they mentioned in passing where the judges they said, we had an amusing time discussing whether somebody could be homeless if they're in a police station. And I'd like to read those to see what they were saying, but I couldn't find them in time. So they say it was accommodation, and was it available for him? Well, yes, it would have been if he'd not left. And then it all turns on reasonable to continue to occupy. That's the real clincher. And they say yes, he was entitled to be treated as having children residing with him at some point in the future, and they weren't saying no, you're never going to be entitled to accommodation with the children. They're just saying that right now, for the short term, and social services had confirmed that the children were with the mother and that was fine, everything was okay, that it was okay for him to be in that accommodation. So it was reasonable for him to continue to occupy. So the answer to all 4 questions is yes. So question 6, which is implied there, is he intentionally homeless? And the answer is yes. I may look stupid if this goes to the court, to the Supreme Court, and they say that's a load of rubbish. But as it stands, that's quite a compelling argument.
I just looking at it again. So if you go to the judgment, paragraph 111, because basically, so I'll read it out. So
I'll get
this
it.
is a part of a whole kind of logical argument here. So it says that leaves the question of whether the children came within Lim A as persons who normally reside with the applicant. Here too, I think it has to be tested at the time that the offer of accommodation was made, which was on the 21st and 24th of April. At those dates, did the children normally reside with him? Again, I think that can properly be answered no. By then, the children were living with their mother. That was admittedly not ideal long-term solution, but it was where they were normally living at the time. So we're talking about a
Or is
few
that the
days
term you
here.
were thinking of?
Yeah, that's because that kind of idea of like, what does it mean to normally reside somewhere, normally be resident somewhere? Well, this is saying that, it could be as little as a few days, really. Which I think, as I say, I wonder if that actually might be useful else in other areas of law. But I just for me, I don't think they've properly dealt with it. I did certainly the first judge, like the judge explaining stuff, I didn't follow that at all. I was like, this doesn't make sense.
No.
And this second one, kind of. Yeah, I need to read it again, but kind of reasonably expected to reside with versus normally residing with. So there's a differentiation there within the law. So I don't know if they'll, I don't know. I mean, with escalating this to the Supreme Court, does it actually require Mr. Beach to be engaged? Because I'm sure at this point in time, Mr. Beach is like, this is, I've got better things to do than to worry about this legal process. I need to go and find out how to get housed. Which, incidentally, by the way, I'm pretty sure like a change in household makeup can be enough to trigger a fresh application.
Oh yeah.
Like so if the social worker in a few weeks' time said actually, yeah, do you know what, Mr. Beach seems to be in a much better place right now. It would be reasonable for the kids to live with him if only he had somewhere to live. Then I wonder if he could just make a fresh application. And I guess he might be found intentionally homeless again. But I don't know. It just seems like
that would be interesting to see. And then the interesting thing with this one is that they did actually find him intentionally homeless, which is good. Well, it's good in the sense that it triggers the Section 190 duty. So if he came back with the children and they were accepted as legitimately residing with him, I think the council would be stuck because they'd have the Section, even if they didn't process a fresh homelessness application, and could get away with that, they'd still have to assist with finding accommodation under Section 190 and also under Section 17 of the Children Act. So it might be easier just to say, all right, but because it's the same thing. And I think one of these days a case is going to come up, but they'll say, well, what's the difference between accommodating somebody under Section 193, which is basically nowadays comes down to finding them a private place, and assisting them with finding accommodation under Section 190. In reality, anyone who works in this area knows that most people are not going to be able to find private accommodation themselves, whereas the council have usually got a stash of private landlords they've done deals with to allow them to discharge duties, which is right. But eventually, I think they'll have to just say, well, we'll offer you something else through that. But it seems a bit crazy, doesn't it? You go through all that hassle. I mean, I think what the courts are saying is, don't let's have an argument about whether somebody's intentionally homeless. Just come back when you got the kids or you want to behave yourself and it'll be okay. But I think they're saying this is an emergency service, and you're abusing it if you if you leave the accommodation, which was actually okay for you just for that night. He could easily go and see his. I mean, I'm no disrespect to his solicitors or anybody involved in the case because I don't know all the facts, but he could easily have stayed in the hotel. I mean, there was another issue about whether he had a comfort dog, which had been mentioned before. But if he could turn up with a letter from the doctor or the psychiatrist or something saying yes, he needs this dog, I mean, he could then challenge the suitability. But I think
also, I mean, he could also potentially trigger a fresh application if he presented information about vulnerability, which I think, reading between the lines, I think there is some stuff there.
Oh, yeah.
So there was some alcohol-related stuff going on, and I think for me that because we were talking earlier about the response on LinkedIn and just how some people are like, I don't know, just kind of they just kind of take all this at face value. I'm assuming something else was going on here in terms of why he was not, why he was coming across as difficult. It's weird in the homeless sector and the charity sector. There's lots of talk about trauma-informed care and stuff. And in one sense, that thinking is to say when you're seeing behaviour which comes across as being difficult, then there's probably more going on. And I just wonder, like, his family. I don't know. But it sounds like. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I'm maybe misreading it, but there seems to be. There's a couple of times the police turned up which I don't know if that was who was at fault there, but there seems to be more going on there basically. And I think just seems that it's a bit of a hollow, it seemed like a bit of a hollow victory. And that was my first response when I saw it kind of like celebrated on LinkedIn. I was like, yeah, I don't know how big this is, and I don't know.
Oh, I don't think it's a big. I
Yeah.
don't think it has particularly wide. I mean, there were some people saying on LinkedIn about how shows how people can't get away with wanting to sort of demand luxury accommodation from the local authority and stuff. And I don't think if you read the case, that's what he was doing. He was just in a bit of a crisis and behaving unreasonably, and he may have been intoxicated quite a lot of the time and not really knowing what he was doing. But the other people on LinkedIn were commenting and saying, "Oh dear, this is a very bad thing because it may mean that victims of domestic abuse can end up getting put in really horrible places." But I don't think it does, because the question at the heart of this is whether the accommodation was reasonable to continue to occupy. And it just so happened in his case that it was at that time. But if he'd had the children staying with him, this would never have happened, because they would have then said, "You've got children with you. Hotel accommodation, well, it could be provided as an emergency measure for 6 weeks." Um, and if they made that clear, I mean, I think that's the thing. But if they'd kept him there for more than 6 weeks, he'd be entitled to challenge it, or even sooner if he could show that it was seriously detrimental. Maybe the hotel wouldn't have offered him accommodation with children.
The way, I mean, I need to go and find out what the text was, but basically when I first saw the Cornerstone, first of all, there's like a pun in the title, it's like, what is it?
On the beach or something. Yeah.
On the beach, which I don't know relevance. That's a very depressing post-apocalyptic book, which is quite famous. I don't know if there's other, I guess there's a cocktail as well, but
there's an
I'm
old
not quite
Cliff
sure
Richard song as well, but
okay, yeah,
which is less
before my
apocalyptic,
time.
as you probably guessed.
Yeah,
It's before
but
my time as well. I think it's before I was born, but I just remember
but
hearing it.
but the way it was kind of like talked about was if to say like, oh, hotel accommodation will be reasonable to continue to occupy for everyone, and it's like that's no way what this case is saying, but that did seem to be the kind of the spin on it. I don't know, maybe I just kind of got carried away with what I
Well,
read, but
I mean, there's a certain amount of spin that goes into these things from, I mean, those involved in the case who've won may want to talk it up. But it's, I mean, it is true. I mean, it is an interesting case, and it does, and as with Awuah, where people at the time, remember when Awuah happened, people were at meetings were saying, "Oh my God, how can people be homeless from temporary accommodation? It's not a home." But of course, I mean, it is accommodation, and so it fits the test. And the lesson, I think, the lesson is just don't refuse stuff, or don't leave it if they give you something, because it is you're dealing with judges that aren't sympathetic, and will take a very simplistic view of it. And if you do that, that's what happens. Well, not simplistic, you know what I mean, logical view, or cold. But I don't think
This is what
sorry.
question I would have, to the point where he was living in the place with the children. Should there not have been the council? Should they have not reassessed the suitability of the temporary accommodation in that change of circumstance, rather than just saying, right, you're clearly not living at the hotel? So instead of going that approach, they should have reassessed the situation as a whole with the children and where they were staying, because they were clearly living with the dad in that lorry container. So instead of
They'd
reassessing
left,
the
they'd gone back to
situation,
the mother by then, though. That's the problem.
I
So
think
they did.
because social services basically had assessed. I think that I don't know if South Hams is a unitary authority or whether it's 2-tier, but social services had assessed the kids already because it'd been brought to their attention because they found in the shipping container. But once it felt again that the reason this case wasn't successful. We're going to look at it was because the social services were involved, and they had effectively an up-to-date assessment which said it's better that the children live with the mum right now, presumably because of the the situation that dad was in and the kind of state he was in. So but I think without that, I don't think that this argument would have won unless that social worker had basically made that assessment, because I think it basically just dealt with that part of it. That's how I read it.
yeah, and then couldn't that have been argued of reassessing of the situation? and the social worker's assessment, instead of saying, well, where do the children want to be? Is it reasonable for them to be with the dad? Why is it reasonable to be with their mum? Instead of saying you aren't living there, reassess the situation.
I think that the view, the what I mean, basically what's happening was they social services appear to be working in tandem with housing, and they basically said, look, right now, kids are better off with mum, but this is not a long-term thing. So essentially, the council were looking to find. They were basically running around trying to find a combination that would take the dad with the 2 or 3 kids, however many were supposed to be with him. And so this kind of hotel thing was only supposed to be for a few days, whilst they kind of found something more suitable. So I think again they took care of it. I think they kind of they weren't just saying, oh, this is the end of it. They were saying, okay, no, we realised that this isn't going to be suitable when your kids are coming back to you in a few days' time, but it is suitable and reasonable to continue to occupy for the time being.
Yeah, I think
I think
that's
that again,
yeah.
there's interesting what gets left out of these transcripts, because I think there's probably more going on as well. But obviously, I don't know. Another thing is like, why? Presumably, if you're Mr. Beach, you can say, I don't want my details to be shared, because we're reading incredibly detailed, kind of intricate things about his life. I just wonder, like, presumably there is a kind of an opt-out thing. You say, no, I don't want to be named thing, and that's why we get like the IA versus Westminster or whatever, where it's kind of anonymized.
Well, I could just explain that, and I think I'll probably have to call it a day after that, because we've been going an hour, or actually slightly less, because we were late starting. But I had this on a case which actually has just been reported because we lost that hoarding case, which is called Tiam, and we asked the court to anonymise it so that her details weren't sort of as they are now broadcast through the law reports, and the judge just refused it, and essentially he's saying that, and I don't really agree with this, but there's an interest in justice demands that it's done and is seen to be done and is open, and I guess the difficulty is if every case was anonymised, it would just be Mr. X. It would be difficult to actually get your head mentally round it. If you see what I mean.
I'm sure we could come up with a way of doing it.
Yeah.
But just, I don't know, like, it just seems like, the data minimization. I mean, I don't know.
No,
data
you're right.
minimization principle. So you might have a lawful basis, but just seems like unnecessary. But yeah, maybe that's a point for another time.
We could actually just have a situation where they just change the name. So instead of being Ivan Beach, here it's sort of Joe McDonald or something, and we just know it as the McDonald case, and that's not the real name. But who cares? We can just, our brains will hang on to that data. But I agree. I mean, I think it's crazy, and a lot of people probably don't realise it when they set off on a journey that they're going to. The funny that if you remember, but back in the 80s, there was a campaigner called Victoria Gillick, who was a sort of far right character who was always campaigning against abortion rights, and she brought legal challenges, and one of them was stop girls of, I think it was to stop girls of a certain age being able to get abortions without consent of their parents. And the irony was she lost. So the rule that said that girls could get this became known as the Gillick rule, and which must have been really annoying for her because she was immortalised as establishing exactly what she didn't want. But it's one of the problems. I mean, I guess it's the nature of the open justice, but maybe we should look into change. Maybe in the future we'll take a more sympathetic view of people's privacy. So I think that's everything. I haven't. Oh, look, let's just have a quick look at the comments. Just say hello to anybody that's out there. Let's go to comments, and if I just go, we've got Cheeseface. Oh, I won't put it up. We've got Tiff. Tiff's got like. Tiff says, hello, sorry I'm late. DW people, a vulnerable person on complex team referral, CTR, and recently HB. Well, sorry, Tiff, there's a lot to be going on with there. I think we might have to come back to that and try and piece it together. It goes on. HB stop rent ages for that, I think, now eviction notice. What can be done to save the home and by whom, please? Well, I think if there's an eviction notice served, then you can apply for a warrant, suspend the warrant if it was made on a discretionary ground. Or if it was made on a mandatory ground, then you'd have to apply to set aside the possession order, and it's much more difficult. I think, and this is going to be a subject for another time, but in an ideal world, which is actually one we already live in, but we're just not making it ideal, you should be able to go to the local authority and say, help, help, I've got these housing problems. And in this case, it would be I'm facing eviction. And they would say, oh, come into the office, which we've now reopened, and we'll talk to you about taking steps to liaise with the landlord and help you apply to suspend the warrant, refer you to solicitors or whatever. But basically, two things: try and find a lawyer, and also, or they should, and try and get in touch with the local authority, because even if the local authority can't help them stop the eviction, they can at least try and help them if they get evicted.
I think make a homeless application like before anything
Yeah,
else, really,
yeah.
because it sounds to me like they might already be legally homeless, regardless of what stage of the eviction process that through on affordability. But yeah, make a homeless application and just basically, some councils do have like court desk kind of contracts and stuff where they do actually do this kind of work really well. Just depends which council you're at.
Yeah. So thank you guys very much for taking up your evening with this, and I hope it was. I mean, I've found out a really interesting chat about the beach case, and it's good to be able to actually dive into these things in detail, isn't it? Maybe we'll get better and better at doing it in the future. So are we on for Thursday? So hopefully see everybody again there, and I'll be back hopefully. Oh no, I'm away next week, so I won't be doing this on Monday. But 2 weeks time, yes, I'll be back. So that's it for now. So I'll say goodbye.
See you guys.
Bye, Karis.
Bye.
Right, so I'll just end the live stream bit, and there.